Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on what time you're watching this. My name's Connor from 905 Review. You guys are checking out our series Give This a Spin, where I recommend you some of my favorite albums. Today we're looking at 90s rock icons Nirvana and their debut album, Bleach. Nirvana was, of course, the leading face of the grunge movement throughout the 90s, becoming a global sensation after the release of their second album, Nevermind, featuring hits like Smells Like Teen Spirit, In Bloom, and Lithium, and are still quite popular today, despite the fact the band dissolved 30 years ago with the passing of frontman Kurt Cobain. But their 1989 debut, Bleach, was before all the fame. Hell, it was before fun guy Dave Grohl was even in the band. Cobain and high school friend Chris Novoselic would make many attempts to get a band going in their small hometown of Aberdeen, just outside of Seattle, Washington. They had trouble deciding on a name as well as finding a consistent drummer. They would occasionally jam with Dale Crover of Melvins, a local band they looked up to, before eventually settling with Chad Channing, though this of course would not be permanent. A crunchy Novoselic bass line opens the first track, Blue, before Cobain and the drums join in with force. And that heaviness comes from the fact that the band liked to play in D tuning, but didn't realize they had already tuned their guitars, and so they went down a step further to drop C for the whole recording session that spawned this take. They later realized this error and re-recorded everything, except for Blue, because they liked the sound of it so much. The lyrics here are awfully vague, so it's widely up to interpretation, but there is this running sense of distress or uncertainty delivered through Cobain's depressive, monotonous tone until the chorus where he brings a bit of angst into it. Exposing myself right now, grunge is one of my absolute favorite genres. Just the crunch of the guitars feels so dirty, and while Channing is no Grohl nor Crover, I can admire the rustic sound of his drumming here, which in a lot of other contexts would sound like a slight, but I mean that in the highest regard. Speaking of drumming, the next song, Floyd the Barber, actually has Dale Crover on it, as it was from a session recorded with him, audible in that extra punch he tends to bring. One thing to keep in mind here is that this was before Nirvana's superstardom. I mean, you could say they were essentially a garage band at this point in time, so this is far from something that you should expect to hear on like a major label record or on the radio with its ugly repetitive sound and its disgusting lyrical content about getting a cut in a barbershop that's just run by this absolutely deranged group of people, something right out of a smutty horror. What's interesting that I never knew before is that the names of these characters that Cobain uses are taken from the Andy Griffith Show, creating this stark contrast between something heartfelt and innocent and this. But it could even be a commentary on public figures who keep this, innocent, clean-cut image, and then you find out the real horror that's going on behind the scenes. If you think like John Wayne Gacy or Jimmy Savile, just as a couple examples. Following this is probably the most mainstream appeal on the album, About a Girl. One thing I can't confirm because I wasn't alive at the time, but what I've heard is that About a Girl actually didn't create much buzz initially. It wasn't until it was played during the band's MTV Unplugged set that it really took off. It was written by Kurt about the rocky relationship he was having with his then girlfriend, and was supposedly conceived during a day of listening to early Beatles material, so it's easy to understand why the band was reluctant to include it on the album, just because of its much lighter sound to it than a lot of the dirt and grit that's on the rest of the album. But I mean, that does kind of seem to be in Cobain's interest from what we know of him being a fan of bands like Pixies and REM, these pop-like songs that just have that extra little bit of grit to them. So while they found including About a Girl to be risky, they didn't want to risk anything too much. So with the distorted guitar to kick off School, they reel you right back into that familiar sound. And Cobain makes it easy for Nirvana's young, angsty fans to relate. Won't you believe it? Just my luck. No recess. And those are essentially the only lyrics of the song. Is it anything to be wowed by? No, of course not. I mean, you could try to look for some deeper meaning in there, like recess at school being the equivalent of the breaks we need from our everyday working lives that we have to do just in order to live, or a mental break from all the chaos always going on in the world. But honestly, with punk music, a lot of times you just had an upfront message in your face, and that's all you needed. Just like Nazi punks f*** off. The next song and lead single, Love Buzz, is actually a cover of a 60s Dutch psychedelic rock group, Shocking Blue. It leads off with a bass line in place of what was originally a sitar, before Kurt's sporadic guitar playing joins in. I've honestly never been too crazy about this one, personally, but in studying this, I did go and listen to the original, which actually was pretty sweet. Would you believe me when I tell you you're the king of my dreams? Ending the first side of the album with plenty of feedback and more Dale Crover on drums is Paper Cuts. It's much slower and more draining than the previous songs, also featuring plenty of Kurt's signature, scratchy, unconventional screaming. For something so decrepit sounding, they back it up further with the lyrics because it tells a story on par with that of Floyd the Barber, of a child being locked up and abused by their parents, just kept in absolutely inhumane conditions. Kicking off the second side of the album with some more speed again is Negative Creep. It's been described as definitive of grunge's sound, A, for all the distortion and the pace of it, but B, for Cobain's self-descriptive lyrics that a lot of the grunge fan base might be able to relate to. I'm a negative creep, and I'm stoned. I'm a negative creep, I'm a negative creep, and I'm stoned. I'm a negative creep, I'm a negative creep, I'm a negative creep, and I was always intrigued what he meant at the chorus by Daddy's Little Girl Ain't a Girl No More, but turns out it's actually an homage to an earlier grunge staple, being Mudhoney and their song Sweet Young Thing Ain't Sweet No More, as in a loss of innocence. Staying in the same vein here is the 8th song, Scoff, in the sense that Kurt's being upfront and honest about who he is. He's depressed, he feels he's not worth anybody's time, and to numb the pain, he just wants his alcohol, despite knowing how dangerous that can be. Nearing album's end now is Swap Meet, a song that reads like a teen romance novel if based in Seattle's grunge scene. What isn't clear to me here is I can't tell if Kurt is scoffing at some of the locals, as the couple in the song, they live comfortably, they drive long distances to eat well, and Kurt himself didn't exactly have the finest upbringing, but it could also be that they're just appreciative of what little they do have, considering he says they make a living off selling homemade crafts, which, I mean, I might be mistaken, but that doesn't sound like the most profitable career, at least not pre-modern internet. Whatever the case may be, the drama of the story is the guy loves the girl loves the guy, and they're both too scared to say anything. And despite this cheesy love story, man does it get dirty. After this is the constantly ascending and descending Mr. Mustache. And the inspiration was actually a comic book character Cobain created when he was younger, based on the stereotypical rednecks who surrounded him where he lived in small town Washington. By the end of the song, he's screaming, "I'm you," which has been theorized to be him struggling with the fact that he doesn't find himself any better than these stereotypical rednecks he hates for being so stubborn with his own beliefs as they are with theirs, which, while incredibly self-aware, unfortunately doesn't help me like the song that much more. And so ending Bleach now is Sifting, where a repeating drum rhythm starts off this slower, drearier track before the typical crunch of the guitars joins in. To me, it sounds like an admission of Kurt's rebellious nature, fearing nothing, ignoring calls from teachers and preachers for his attention. Hell, wetting your bed, wouldn't it be fun? Personally, no, I don't think so, but you do you, Kurt. But to all the people trying to get something out of him, he bluntly puts it during the chorus, "Don't have nothing for you." Most, if not all, CDs, as well as some records of this album from 1990 onwards, also contain two more songs, Big Cheese and Downer. Big Cheese is directed at Jonathan Poneman, one of the founders of Sub Pop, on which Bleach was released, about how tumultuous Nirvana found working with him and the label, and how their relationship just fell apart. I'm honestly somewhat surprised at how much I've grown to like this one over time. Downer, which later appeared on the compilation Incesticide, I have much less praise for, as Kurt even later stated it was their attempt at making something Black Flag inspired, which I feel kind of took them out of their usual wheelhouse. Over the years, there's been so many different releases of Bleach coming on different color vinyls, having different color text on the cover, even having different colored tints of the cover. More notable variants were the Aqua Swirl, the series of different color marble vinyls, one of which also containing the single Sliver, the 1992 Australian Tour Edition, a picture disc, a clear one, a clear blue splatter. In 2009, the 20th Anniversary Edition, either on CD or a double vinyl set, also contained audio from a live show in Portland in 1990, while a lot of heavy or rough bands I find sound better live because, I don't know, it's almost like there's more grit to it. It's a less polished sound, right? The set list also contained some songs that weren't on Bleach. Later funky variants included a yellow and orange swirl, maroon and black, clear and white, a blue and black swirl, as well as a clear and black swirl, with the later two both containing the Portland show. And with so many more coming out in 2020, 2021, and 2023, it's needless to say that there's no shortage of cool variants of this album. If it weren't for Nirvana's monumental success with later tours and albums, I wouldn't be surprised if Bleach would have only reserved an underground following. While it received positive feedback in small circles at the time of its release, its initial 40,000 copies sold pale in comparison to the near double platinum certification it's at over 1.9 million units moved. And when listening to Bleach, it's with that lens that I think you must listen with, not as a generation-defining rock band, but just as those guys down the street in their garage. With that being said, this album might not be for everyone, as I've seen some pretty bad takes regarding it, but with such a lack of mainstream appeal, maybe it's Nirvana's most genuine album. These were just some guys writing their songs. Outside of About a Girl, I wouldn't expect to hear anything from here on the radio. With everything considered, I'm going to stamp Bleach with an A- grading. There's lots that I can rock out here too, even if my favorite songs aren't as great to me as they once were in the past. Just to reiterate again, there's not a whole lot profound here. If you just need something with some energy to get you going, this is it. You might just be better off listening to this album, not thinking too deeply at it, taking it at face value, but at the same time, I would completely understand if to you that doesn't sound like something deserving of praise. But those are just my thoughts on Nirvana's 1989 debut, Bleach. Let me know yours. As always, I appreciate you so much for sticking around, and maybe you'll stick around a little while longer. Anyhow, we'll see you around. But, real quick, before we take off, what were your thoughts on Bleach by Nirvana? Did I rate it too high? Did I rate it too low? You let me know down below, as well as anything else you might be thinking, any other albums you might want me to check out, and we'll see you in the next one. You take it easy.